Good morning. Long, long ago, in an America far, far away, in a time of great trial and tribulation and crisis, the American people cried out and prayed for a Messiah. And lo, did Providence smile upon them and sent them Messiah Roosevelt, by name of Franklin Delano. And he did smite the money changers and all corrupted ones, and verily did Roosevelt Messiah restore prosperity and virtue to his people. Lo, all these many eons in the interregnum, once again have the people suffered and wasted under corruption and oppression. But now has come Obama-Messiah to once again heal our land and save our people. And he hath hearkened unto the legacy of Messiah Roosevelt, FDR. And so it has come to pass that in every administration since, we have subjected ourselves to these evaluations of the first 100 days. FDR, in his first 100 days, as the legends go, as the storybooks and the history books say, he did save us from depression, from destruction, and he did restore our country. And so, Obama-Messiah has taken his patron saint and this is not my photoshopping. You probably saw, this is Time magazine. They call it the New Deal. And we know the New Deal that was bequeathed to us by Roosevelt Messiah. And so from the very beginning, Obama cast himself and his media handlers and his insider operator handlers who recruited him have cast him in this role of the Roosevelt Messiah, again bringing us a new deal, and in fact they even say now a new global deal. And so in this first 100 days we have all of the great ones in the media telling us what a wonderful experience we have been having under the new Obama-Messiah. David Broder, Washington Post, tells us that this first 100 days was a bravura opening. He says, a bravura performance. What he has shown, and it is an important accomplishment in itself, is a mastery of the art of managing the presidency. Joel Klein at Time and also Politico says, Obama's start has been the most impressive of any president since FDR. And so it has gone. But of course, we have even Novosti Press from Russia, from Moscow. Russian analysts praise Obama's first steps as U.S. president. Indeed, it seems to be universal. In all the major media, Obama is the prophet, the Messiah, the Savior, the Superman, the rock star, the sex machine. Now this is, I mentioned I did not Photoshop the FDR one, but the Washingtonian even caught some flack amongst its liberal confreres for this cover, which they did Photoshop in order to enhance his image even more. They colorized it, trimmed him up a little, and things like that. Obama-Messiah. Well, it is going to take an Obama-Messiah in order to deal with many of the real problems and crises which we have. And Mr. President has risen to the challenge, or at least he says he is. We have before us here Paul Volcker. Some of you may remember him from distant memory. Former chairman of the Federal Reserve, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, one of the ruling members of the Council on Foreign Relations. And he is one of the sponsors and one of the economic advisors to Barack Hussein Obama. And so he said, I don't know if you can read it from where you are, I will read it for you. He spoke on January 21st, I believe it was, to the House Banking or Finance Committee, and he said, quote, "To put it starkly, we are in a serious recession." You know, that verboten word that wasn't even allowed for the last 12 months. In a serious recession with no end clearly in sight. Over time, the hard fact is several $trillion will be necessary to be committed in a combination of budgetary expenditures and various guarantee and insurance programs and extensions of credit by the Federal Reserve. Several $trillion. Now that's a fairly good sum to be that cavalier about, several $trillion. He didn't give any specific sum to it, but obviously Mr. Obama has some major miracle working cut out for him in order to do this. So he declared in his first budget speech that we were entering a new era of responsibility. No more of this spendaholic nonsense of the Bush administration. Now, if that sounds again familiar, like he ripped it from a page of Roosevelt Messiah from FDR, that's exactly the case. You recall that FDR, when he was campaigning, he was ripping on Herbert Hoover for all of his spendaholic ways, which he was doing as a Republican. The Republicans were spending and regulating us into oblivion, and he was castigating Congress and the Republican administration, and of course when he came in he upped it by magnitude several times. Now, Bush and the Republican super spenders have paved the way, unfortunately, for Obama and the Democrat mega super spenders. As we pointed out in this issue of the New American months ago, the bailout mania that the Republicans started has undercut all of our efforts now to rein in the Democrats as this accelerates. But to get back to the Obama's new era of responsibility, he launched on February 17th, or signed into law, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, otherwise known as the Stimulus Plan. And what it has brought us is nothing short of frightening, astonishing, stunning, horrifying. We are looking at a mountain of debt, or an ocean of debt, which they have projected, and as we know from past experience, they always lowball these estimates even when they're already horrendous. Here, these are the Bush deficits, which were already incredible by past experience. And here we are going into the projected deficits, the red ones being the Congressional Budget Office projections, which are more realistic than the Obama administration, which are the pink ones here. You see, in each case, they, as administrations always do, they have lowballed the amount of debt. Right now for fiscal year 2009, $1.85 trillion deficit, and a White House had given an estimate of $1.75 trillion. Well, Obama called his $787 billion stimulus bill the Recovery and Reinvestment Act. They always have good names like that for these things. It is the largest appropriation bill ever passed by Congress, and he called it a major milestone on our road to recovery. A budget of $3.8 trillion is more than a third higher than last year's budget, with $1.8 trillion in red ink. The Wall Street Journal said just a couple of days ago, on the 23rd, overall, the world economy is now expected to contract 1.3% this year, a sharp reduction from the IMF's January estimate of 0.5% growth for 2009, and then grow just 1.9% in 2010, well below the global growth rate before the economic crisis hit. By any measure, the IMF's twice-yearly World Economic Outlook concluded this Wednesday. This downturn represents by far the deepest global recession since the Great Depression. Now, for once, the IMF is probably telling the truth. Independent analysts have been saying this, people like Peter Schiff and Martin Weiss and others like that who've been following this closely and have developed a credible record in these matters, have been saying this for months or years. What does this mean in terms of the actual debt? We are already paying $147 billion in interest on the debt for 2009. According to Obama's budget, the interest on national debt will rise from $171 billion in 2010 to $391 billion in 2019. Now that is just based upon the estimates, again, of the minor contractions that they're talking about. If the contractions are even worse in the economy, then of course the deficits and the revenues are much smaller, the deficits are much bigger. As of March 23rd, 2009, the entire national debt accumulated since the founding of our nation was $11,041,711,000,000. The Congressional Budget Office forecasts an additional $9.27 trillion added over the next 10 years. So it took the country over 200 years to acquire the current level of debt. Obama's budget would double the number in just 5% of that time. According to the CBO, the total national debt by 2019 will be equal in size to 82.4% of the economy. We are responsible to pay back the money overspent during past administrations. But we should be looking to reduce spending to cut back on the amount of interest we're paying in the future. And not only us, of course, but our children and our children's children. 84%. That is a banana republic, a third world country. That's unheard of in our lifetimes or in the history of our country. That is what corrupt dictators do to the economy. Does it tell us something about ourselves and about our leaders? Secretary Timothy F. Geithner, Treasury Secretary, in his remarks before the Economic Club of Washington recently, said, quote, "The International Monetary Fund now expects the world economy to decline this year for the first time in more than 6 decades," the whole world economy. "The collapse of world trade will likely be the worst since the end of World War II." Again, I never believe anything that the Federal Reserve or the Treasury Department or most of these economic analysts say, but in this particular case, I believe they are telling the truth. I question their motives, but the facts seem to bear this out. Now, thank the Lord for the Republicans, right? They came up with an alternative budget, which they released. The Republican Alternative Responsible Budget Plan calls for only $500 billion plus annual deficits through 2019. Every annual deficit in the Republican budget would be larger than any deficit in the entire history of the nation before 2008. The only thing that would give these huge deficits the appearance of being conservative or responsible is that the deficits in the Obama budget would end up being even bigger. The website for the House Republicans calls their plan fiscal responsibility, Republicans on the budget. And admittedly, it would cut the Obama deficits by about $100 billion per year. But since when is calling for $500 billion plus deficits annually and forever, secula seculorum, amen, fiscal responsibility? Well, just since the very recent history of the last few months. So that's really some alternative that the Republicans are offering us. And of course, this has come to this because of the last 8 years of the Republican Bush spend-a-thon. In terms of the Bush legacy, it's interesting, a story in the McClatchy News Service by Tyler Bridges had it really pretty right for a so-called mainstream paper. It said, quote, with the Bush administration's Treasury Department resorting to government bailout after government bailout to keep the U.S. economy afloat, leftist governments and their political allies in Latin America are having a field day, gloating one day and taunting the Bush the next for adopting the types of interventionist government policies that he's long condemned. End quote. The story then goes on to quote John Ross, a left-wing advisor to socialist Hugo Chavez's government in Venezuela. He says that the Bush administration, quote, they have abandoned every policy that they've advocated that other governments should follow over the last 20 years, and they've adopted the measures that they've condemned other governments for taking. And of course, we had to be on the receiving end of similar criticisms and bromides from the likes of Hu Jintao and Vladimir Putin of Russia and all of the Euro-socialists at the World Economic Forum and at the G20 summit. So that is where we've come to, where the socialists, communists, the Marxists are lecturing us about too much government spending. This is another one of the projections. This one is taken from the Congressional Budget Office forecasts and a graph put together by the Wall Street Journal. Again, this shows the spending over here, the revenue from fiscal year 1980 on up through here we are right there, going all the way out to 2019. And again, if we do not see a major push by the American people getting fed up and kicking some of these guys out, getting some more Ron Paul type congressmen in Congress, they will continue this, and spending is spending and revenue is revenue, and never the twain shall meet. And we shall see that go diverging in ever larger magnitude. So where will this take us if we allow this to happen? This is a recent issue of the New American Magazine, From Riches to Rags. And we should ask ourselves, will America go the way of Zimbabwe and other third world countries? Zimbabwe, formerly known as Rhodesia, like South Africa, was one of the most prosperous countries in the world, a modern, industrialized country. And in just less than one generation, it's gone back to virtually almost to the Stone Age. And that is how civilizations fall, and fall very rapidly. Here we see in Zimbabwe, the poor people there having to change a whole handful of currency for a chicken. And that's after the currency has been revalued again, and we've gone through many times in history where people have to take whole wheelbarrow loads full of money. How does that happen? Because those people are charging too much for their chickens, right? So we have to have a solution, and of course we got to put people back to work. So thankfully, Obama has come up with national service. On April 21st, President Obama signed the Edward M. Kennedy Serve America Act. We're going to get people back to work again. Of course, they're going to be working for the government, but hey, I've been told that that works quite well. I think it's been tried in the past and has had very good success. I can think there's a, oh yeah, I recall there was a guy back in Germany who tried it. He called it the Brown Shirts National Service Program. Yeah, that's him. National Service. The fearless leader right there is Der Führer himself, Adolf, and his brown shirts. Of course, another one of our favorite people in history, he proved that it works, right? Mussolini and his black shirts. They were socialists, they were fascists, they were dictators, they were tyrants. And in fact, but their national service programs worked. It did put people to work. There were a number of costs associated with it, and I think there were even some other cases in history. Well, yes, here's another one. Chairman Mao and his Red Guards. This was another, I'm told, a very successful national service plan. Really inspired the young people, put them to work. In all of these cases, there tended to be some collateral damage, a few millions of lives lost here and there, as well as prosperity and productivity. But there's never been a national service program that hasn't gone in that direction. Coerced government volunteerism is oxymoronic. I mean, that should be facially obvious. But he also has an energy independence plan. We heard a lot about that during the campaign. Let's look at what has already been signed into law in that regard. A couple of months ago, we saw the Public Lands Bill being introduced, the Omnibus Public Lands Act of 2009. In the Senate, it was known as S-22. It sailed through the Senate with the support of 20 Republicans, Senate Republicans. Then it went to the House and unfortunately passed through the House, again with a number of Republicans not even putting up opposition to it. Some of the opposition, unfortunately, that was put up to it was because we were told it had pork barrel spending, and people would point to $1 million here or $5 million there that was going to be used for some pork barrel spending program. But that isn't what the real problem is with the Public Lands Bill. The real problem with the Public Lands Bill is that it locks up millions and millions of acres of our most promising areas for needed oil, natural gas, mineral production. Here are some of the things that it does. It will block millions of acres from new oil and gas leasing, logging, mining, and all other business activities in these areas. It will eliminate 1.2 million acres from mineral leasing and energy exploration in Wyoming alone, withdrawing 331 million barrels of recoverable oil and 8.8 trillion cubic feet of natural gas from domestic energy supply. There's a lot of yippee-ing going on over in the Middle East, you can be sure of that, and in Venezuela. It designates more than 2 million acres of land as wilderness areas and permanently eliminates human access to these areas for energy exploration or recreational opportunities. And President Obama signed the Omnibus Public Lands Management Act into law on March 30th, less than a month ago. His EPA declared that human breath, CO2, is a pollutant. And so now they will be using the power, regulatory power of the EPA to clamp down on all human activity, all manufacturing, farming, production of any kind, creates carbon dioxide. And of course, we've written a lot about this in the New American over the years. This is utterly ludicrous, only it isn't humorous at all. It is utterly draconian, and you can't think of anything that would give government more totalitarian power than to be able to actually tax and control your breath and every activity. Well, here's another story that just came out just a few days ago. FERC. You might not be familiar with that, but FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and the man here is John Wellinghoff, and he announced contrary to the Obama administration's attempt to appear rational and moderate during the campaign and since, when they said, oh, we're going to try to work on all kinds of energy. He's announced now, well, we don't need no stinking nukes. We don't need any of these nuclear power or coal power. We're going to be regulating them out of existence, and we're going to go more and more to quote-unquote alternative fuels. Going along with the economy and the environment, of course, a couple of weeks ago we had this big splash for several days, the G20 summit and NATO summits, European summits in London, and the Obama apology and appeasement tour throughout Europe then. This particular issue of the New American is the one you should probably have just received last week or this week, Global Fusion, which focuses primarily on the G20 summit. We had been writing online about this for a couple of months, actually since last November, pointing out that after the G20 summit in Washington in November, that we were reading all their documents and whatnot, and this is exactly what they were going to be doing. They were going to be pushing for the New World Order, and of course we see Obama there with Gordon Brown, the Prime Minister of the UK, and that's exactly what Gordon Brown called for. He says we have to have a new world order, a new global order, a new global economic order. All of those watchwords that we've been talking about for decades now are coming more and more to the fore. And again, online we have links to a lot of those primary sources where the news stories where those appeared, and some of them even on video. The London Summit, there we have the gathering of the G20 heads of state. As we've written and as we've exposed, was a big push to supersize the IMF, to turn this current economic crisis into a launch pad for finally doing what the pioneers and engineers of the United Nations and of the International Monetary Fund and World Bank attempted to do back at Bretton Woods and Dumbarton Oaks in 1944 and 45. That is to create a world monetary authority that would have issuance of currency, control over the issuance and credit and interest, and that would be, in essence, a one world Federal Reserve System, not beholden to any or under the accountability of any sovereign nation or group of nations. And that is precisely what they called for in the roll-up to the summit and at the summit itself, to give the International Monetary Fund, which was the creation of John Maynard Keynes, a socialist, a one world socialist, and Harry Dexter White, the communist Soviet agent, who was in our Treasury Department. They were the ones in control of the Bretton Woods summit, and that they created it. And that's what they called for back then. And now, all these many years later, we are seeing the push to actually do that. Some of you may have seen, we had online video of the Fox News report where Dick Morris and Sean Hannity were discussing this the day before the summit. And Dick Morris was saying, hey, this is an attempt. They're going to try to create a world monetary authority, a global SEC that will control all financial activities, and a global bank that will control all banking and money. And Sean Hannity says, no, what are you saying? He says, it's in the papers. It's right there in their papers. And Sean Hannity says, those conspiracy people were right. That's what they were saying. And Dick Morris says, yeah, they're right. They're right. This is exactly what they were saying. They said that the United Nations was trying to build a world government, and I guess they were right all this time. We haven't gotten any apologies yet from either of those two who have scorned and spoofed us all these years for that. But they are not the only ones. Many others are finally seeing that, hey, this is a very frightening thing. We're giving unprecedented, these leaders are proposing giving unprecedented, unbridled power, economic power, from which will flow political power. If you control people's money, all of their access to credit and money, all of their business and whatnot, you basically control them. It doesn't matter even their armies or whatever savings they may have. You can destroy their savings virtually overnight. So we are seeing a wake-up call with that. The Obama administration, of course, is also moving very quickly to empower the UN in many different ways. The issue that we had here focusing on the Law of the Sea Treaty, LOST, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. We've been writing about this and speaking about it for 4 decades. It's been around that long. And finally now it is the Bush administration, George Bush, was the first one to break ranks. The Republican administrations had all opposed it in the past. His father was George Bush Sr. wanting to move it forward, but he couldn't because of opposition within the Republican Party. George W. was the first one to push through very strongly, repeatedly, for ratification of the Law of the Sea Treaty, which would give the United Nations control over everything in the sea, under the sea, over the sea, everything, all waters running into the sea, virtually the planet. The one coming up right here very soon, of course, coming up with the big negotiations in December, is the Climate Change Treaty, the Global Warming Treaty. And this is really interesting because it's coming at a time, if you've been following the New American, where the science has been going directly in the opposite direction, regardless of what you hear every night on the evening news from all the blathery heads that are out there. All the top scientists are on our side. I mean, and they're defecting from the other side in record numbers. But the media and the politicians are having us believe that, no, we're really in dire straits from anthropogenic climate change. He's also announced that he's going to move forward on the UN Millennium Development Goals, which means an increased foreign aid, which will be an annual commitment of the United States to the percentages agreed by the UN at the Millennium Goals, which would just basically put us on autopilot so the UN would get this money every year, of course, to help the world's poor. Supersizing the IMF, of course, is one of the big ones, which we've already talked about here. He raised the UN ambassador to cabinet level, and we'll go into who that person is very shortly. And one of the announced objectives of that UN ambassador, who's now cabinet level, and of the Obama administration himself, is to enhance UN peacekeeping power in a number of different areas. And so to move into Somalia and Darfur and other areas with US troops, but in a UN peacekeeping system. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, this is one of the things where we see many of our folks that we would usually consider foes on the far left, who have been after George Bush and Obama to end the wars, the unconstitutional wars and the immoral wars and unwinnable wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which is really the genuine conservative constitutionalist position. We should never have gone into those places in the first place with an occupational force. Immigration, illegal alien amnesty, border security. Janet Napolitano, she's our big hero there. She was one of those put forward as the hardcore conservative centrist from Arizona who was going to save us. But of course, right after she got in and they had their first ICE raid, she got all upset about that, and she demanded that all of the illegal aliens be released. And in fact, here you see a CNN report. This man is one of many who were captured by ICE in the state of Washington, and his name is Gerardo Aureola Gonzalez, and he was supposed to be deported, but instead he was given a work card, and now he and thousands other like him are allowed to stay here. The federal government has given more H-1B visas this year. And instead of doing those kinds of things to take care of our security, we now see that Janet Reno Napolitano has issued this report, Right-Wing Extremism, Current Economic and Political Climate Fueling Resurgent Radicalization and Recruitment, which we've written about quite a bit in the New American. And she and Obama have ventured down to Mexico to really help with security by entering into a new gun control, firearms control, ammunition control treaty with Mexico and all of Latin America. This is from April 16. Obama supports an inter-American arms treaty. That's the treaty there on the Organization of American States website. The Inter-American Convention Against Illicit Manufacturing of and Trafficking in Firearms, Ammunition, Explosives, and Other Related Materials. I've read it, but I haven't studied it, as Larry Pratt, the head of Gun Owners of America, has. He says, and I believe him because he's analyzed it, that the treaty would basically wipe out even those things like reloading your own ammunition. Abortion. On January 23, as one of his first official acts, President Obama signed an executive order reversing the United States Mexico City policy against funding abortion. Governor Kathleen Sebelius will probably be up for confirmation vote on Tuesday. She's one of the most pro-abortion governors in the country. She held fundraisers for George Tiller the Killer at her residence, and he gave a considerable amount of money to her campaign. David Hamilton, U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit. He has ruled for abortion, against prayer in the schools, against prayer in the state legislature, has overruled state protection laws for minors. He has been appointed to the Court of Appeals. His confirmation will be coming up. The man you see in the background there next to Janet Reno is David Ogden. He's been appointed Deputy Attorney General. He was very active in the Clinton administration. He was an attorney for the ACLU, as well as for Penthouse, Playboy, and others in the pornography industry. So he's been a very activist, radical attorney. Unfortunately, the Republicans in the Senate betrayed us there, and John McCain, John Kyle, Richard Lugar, Christopher Bond, Judd Gregg, Greg Voinovich, Arlen Specter, Lindsey Graham, Lamar Alexander, all joined with the Democrats in confirming him. Harry Knox, a homosexual activist named to Obama's White House Advisory Council on Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships. He's having a program next week, moving from acceptance to advocacy, trying to get the clergy to go out and testify in favor of doing away with all of our sodomy laws and any other kind of restriction. Some of the conservatives have, neocons I should say, have been saying that really Obama is surprising them. His administration, and particularly his top appointments, are really quite centrist and are quite conservative. William Kristol, Karl Rove, Mona Charen, a lot of these folks are saying that, oh, don't be too worried, it's really pretty good. But I would take my cue from this man, Mark Rudd. You might remember him from the 1960s, one of the founders of SDS. He has relaunched SDS. He's a hardcore Marxist, he says so. But he says, hey, Obama is a pragmatist. He says, Obama's economic agenda will stress stimulation from the bottom sometimes and handouts to the top at other times. It will be pragmatic. He says, that's why all of these conservative appointments are important. The strategy is to feint to the right and move to the left. Any other strategy invites sure defeat. It would be stupid to do otherwise in this environment. So all of these guys that the neocons say are conservative, like Timothy Geithner, CFR, Treasury Secretary, Lawrence Summers, CFR, Director of the National Economic Council, the guys that are nationalizing and socializing our economy at every step, every industry. They're the ones that took over GM, and there you see Rick Wagner after the press conference announcing he'd been replaced with a government CEO appointed by Obama. This is what these conservatives in the administration are doing. Of course, we know Hillary, Zbigniew Brzezinski, one of the top advisors to Obama, advisor to Carter. They helped, along with Hillary, to put together this meeting with Hugo Chavez just last week with Obama, and the change on the Cuba policy. Mark Rudd said, quote, look to the second level appointments. There's a whole government in waiting that John Podesta has at the Center for American Progress. They're mostly progressives. They're code word for hard left, Marxist, communists. Cheney was extremely effective at controlling policy by putting his people in at second level positions. And the man who is leading all of those second level positions is Obama transition leader Thomas Donilon. And there's an article that he wrote for Foreign Affairs, the Journal of the Council on Foreign Relations, and it was all about confirmation. This was several years ago in 2000. He's the man that's now putting that into practice in the Obama administration. So these are a few of the other folks, the Council on Foreign Relations, one-worlders that are in the Obama administration. There, of course, you remember Elian Gonzalez. That infamous case was put together by Greg Craig and Eric Holder, who's now our Attorney General and Chief White House staff, Chief White House Counsel. Carol Browner, the climate czar, assistant to the President for Energy and Climate Change. She is a leader in the Socialist International. And the Obama administration say they're not socialists. Anthony Lake, Foreign Policy and National Security Advisor. Of course, we take great pride in the John Birch Society, New American, for being credited by the New York Times and others for stopping his elevation to CIA and national security under Clinton. But he's back now. But what they're doing is they've learned from that mistake, and they are putting less noticeable people out in front. And then finally, of course, we've written about this, Professor Ingrid Mattson, President of the Islamic Society of North America, a very radical appointee of Obama. That's it for now. Thank you.